how do you feel about the first declaration of love made in front of others versus a one-on-one?
I like declarations of love that are like, I cannot keep this in anymore. Mm-hmm. And so I don't care if it's like out, if it's in front of other people. Like, I love a declaration of love that's like, one of them is just like, obviously I'm in love with her.
Yeah.
She's the greatest person who's ever lived.
Yeah.
How could I not be in love with her? And maybe you suck.
Lillian, we're back again. How are you? How you doing?
I'm so good, Piper.
Yay.
By the way, it's my New Year's resolution to remember to actually say your name in episodes.
Oh.
Because I've had to re-listen to some of our episodes for various reasons recently, and I keep forgetting to say your name. So that obviously people know who Piper is.
Well, so that's kind. I have found it funny that I've recently in some of our things been like introducing us, and we're like, I'm Piper, say hi, Lillian. It's just like, yeah, we just gotta flow with it, you know? Find our own little rhythm.
I just forget that people who aren't like close friends with us listen to this. Although all of our listeners are close friends, and we love you guys.
It's very true. Even if you listened for 5 minutes and then turned it off in disgust, we still like you. At least I do.
Yeah. Yeah. We love that you did what was right for you, which was stop listening to us talk.
Hooray. So, but if you're still here, that means you're very excited to hear us talk about the movie Belle from 2014. This is a palate cleanser. No, it's a 2014.
No, 2013. Jesus Christ. I don't know why I said 2011 knowing that was wrong.
Want to throw in some more random dates? 1592?
No. It's because 2011 has something to do with what we're doing next week. Anyway, spoilies.
Well, when I watched this on HBO, it gave it the date of 2014. So maybe they're wrong. Or maybe you're wrong? I don't want
I've never been wrong before in my entire life.
That's why I said it with the question mark.
IMDb and Wikipedia say 2013.
All right.
So HBO is wrong.
It's wrong.
But also weird, this is not what anyone comes here for, but weird fact that I've learned is like the date that a film is released is sort of wonky because sometimes it has a copyright date of 1 year, but it actually was in theaters a different year. And so they use both interchangeably.
Okay.
That's what the 1943 with Orson Welles, Jane Eyre is, because it was released in December in the UK, but then it was released in January in the US. And so some places call it 44 and some places call it 43.
Wow.
Time is weird.
Yeah, as we've established many times on this show. But
that's one of our themes.
Ooh. Well, I'm not certain then if you and I, when we originally saw this together, if it was 2013 or 2014, but we did see it together in theaters. Because I remember I saw the trailers, I was really excited about it, and you are obviously my period drama romance friend / history movie, so I was like, let's go see this, and we did. And the thing that I constantly think about before we go into recap, just to get people excited, is I remember very clearly in the first few minutes of this film, there's a cute little scene where the two girls who were essentially raised as sisters are hanging out in the lawn together when they're little kids, and one of them is doing this little dance and one is just watching her dance, and you leaned over and you're like, oh my god, it's me and Maya. And I'm like, yes. And it's
because our friend Maya would put up with my antics. Sometimes when we weren't in public places, she would antic, but mostly it was me anticing and Maya being like, I'm also here, and I love her, so be sweet to the crazy girl in the corner.
And you know what? She's still putting up with antics to this day. That's what true friendship is. Hey, in case you haven't had the opportunity to see this beautiful film, Lillian, would you mind giving us a recap so people know what we're about to talk about?
Yes, could you time me so that I don't go for 7 years?
Yeah, although having a timer has never stopped us from going a long time. It simply holds us accountable after the fact.
We used to do these in literally we used to do our first couple of Jane Eyre ones where we were trying to be under a minute, and we were usually under a minute, and now if we get it under 2 minutes, we're like, oh, good job.
I know, right? Okay,
I am going to do this one fast for real, though.
Yay, I'm ready when you are.
Okay, so it's England. Slavery is real and shitty. And there is a little girl whose mom was a slave and her dad was a military captain dude who's fancy and his family's all fancy. And so he comes and he goes, "You're my daughter and you're coming home with me. And your name is Belle." And then he brings her back to his family and her family's like, "Did you know this girl is black?" And he's like, "Yeah, absolutely. Give her all of my money and all of the access to all this stuff. Everybody who doesn't think she deserves that sucks." And then she grows up with a little blonde sister whose family doesn't like her, but she's a little blonde sister, so she's allowed to be there. And they grow up and they're sisters and they're at an age where they're coming to age and boys are out there and they want to do kissing stuff. But it's hard in literally slave times, for a black woman to participate in British high society. And she's sort of like split between these two worlds and it's messy. And there's a guy who's like, "I'm going to set aside the fact that you're black and love you anyway because you're rich. Give me your money. Do as I say." And then there's another guy who's like, "Fuck, you're amazing and hot. And it's cool that you're a cool person who has cool beliefs. And by the way, you being black is like a side note to me and also like an important part of who you are as a person. But it's also not the only reason, like I'm not setting it aside to love you." And he tries to kiss her and people don't want that to happen. And then in the end, slavery is kind of like, we shouldn't do it. And then, but they love each other and they kiss and stuff. And there's a painting.
Yes. Oh, the end. There's a painting. And then there's no like finality to your tone. It just kind of sounds like, so maybe this should have been a little fewer than the time that I got, but I did track after the long pause for 1 minute, 37 seconds.
So better than sometimes.
Yeah, especially with all the heavy social historical context that you needed to include. So
yeah,
well done. Good job.
Speaking of heavy social context, I need to include.
We thought
Piper and I.
Yeah, we thought we might get some of the sad historical facts out of the way because all these things are important and must be addressed, and then we can talk about romance and period dramas and swooning over true love.
Yes. So anybody who knows this show probably had the same reaction Piper did in watching this, where she was like, "Oh, it's a fun kissing movie. But there's a lot of history in here that Lillian's going to make me think about for real on the podcast." And I'm a little bit sorry, but I'm not that sorry because we're super white and privileged, and slavery was like genuinely makes me so mad. I want to scream about it all the time. Mm-hmm. Bad. Mm-hmm. So here we go.
Here we go.
We're going to start with the worst thing I've said out loud on this podcast, which is the Zong massacre. So the central point in this story is, or one of the central like societal conflicts is there's this Zong appeal that's happening. So there was this is a true historical fact. There was a slave ship with 130 enslaved people who were kept in terrible conditions, got sick, and were intentionally drowned by the crew because they did not think they were going to be able to recoup the cost or actually sell these people for money. And they wanted the insurance money for the 130 human beings that they drowned. Mm-hmm. That is a real fact that actually happened.
And that is what is up for debate in the like British High Court or Supreme Court. And it's also not only just an important fact that's happening in the background of this story, but Belle, or as her first name is and how she's referred to as Dido in the movie, her essentially like adoptive father, he is like the high judge who is going to be ruling on this case and making a decision. And so it's very important, what he decides to kind of then influence how history and how England navigates the issue of slavery going forward really hinges on this one man's kind of decision.
And he is a person in history who we know quite a bit about. She is a person in history who we know almost nothing about. So other than the fact that she was living in this great house, we don't really know much about her. She did get married and have 2 kids, but we don't really know much beyond that. So most of this movie with the social stuff that happens in it is completely fictionalized. Mm-hmm. So she did have this cousin sister person. They are in this painting together, which we'll talk about at the end. But almost everything else about the social stuff is fictionalized. Mm-hmm. How close these 2 people were, how much her existence influenced his choices in these, any conversations like that are still sort of TBD. What I do know about that case is there was actually 2 cases. The Zahn case was the second case. There was another case that had happened prior to that I did not look up as many facts about because I was deeply sad. But these 2 cases were both presided over by the same judge, who was this judge who is this character who's sort of her father figure in the movie. And the other one was called the Somerset and Stewart case, which was 11 years prior. So the things that he says at the very end of the movie, as kind of summing up the trial, one of the lines that he says is the state of slavery is so abhorrent that nothing can be suffered to support it. Mm-hmm. That is a line from the other conclusion of the other case. So they've kind of taken these 2 cases and blended some of the facts from them.
Gotcha.
They were both cases that were really important for the ending of slavery for the UK, but this took place in 1871. Mm-hmm. So the first case happened 11 years prior to that in 1870. Mm-hmm. The slave trade ended in January of 1808. And Dido Elizabeth Belle mm-hmm. died in 1804. Mm-hmm. So slavery lasted her entire life. Mm-hmm. And while the slave trade ended in 1808, slavery was not abolished in Britain or in British colonies until 1834, still well before America. Mm-hmm. And here's the last deeply sad fact that I will bring to this, because I do think that the history of slavery is something that is incredibly important for us to acknowledge and talk about. And I don't want to just brush over it in this episode because it is really important. But I think at different points during this, we might be talking about the fun kissing a little bit more than the sad slavery. So this is the last fact that I'll bring to contextualize just how sort of horrendous this society's views on slavery were. Mm-hmm. At the time that slavery ended in 1834, they paid $20 million, or 20 million pounds at the time, which is 300 million pounds in today's money in reparations. Piper, who do you think that money went to?
The people who lost their slaves?
Yep, mm-hmm. The people who lost their slaves. Yep. They didn't give reparations to the enslaved people, mm-hmm. but instead to the people who they were like, hey, we're going to free your slaves, but don't worry, we're going to give you a lot of money about it. And you might think, Lillian, that was a long time ago. Just get over it. Never, first of all. And second of all, they took out a loan to pay that money to those people. They paid that off. They made the final payment to pay off slave owners in 2015.
Oh my God. Wow. Jesus Christ.
So
history is still among us, everybody. Don't forget it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This has real tangible impacts today. Mm-hmm. I could talk about that for days and days and years and years. It is an incredibly important thing to understand. And while I think this film did better than some, mm-hmm. and also did a lot of white savior stuff that I didn't love.
Yeah, for sure.
So
that's something that Hollywood and I think other Western cinema still really needs to work on. Because yes, we'll do plenty of movies that say, look, we're shining a light on this, but they always insert the current very popular, attractive white actors and actresses to be like, well, we still need to sell the film to white people, so let's put these guys front and center.
Well, and we don't want white people to feel bad about stuff, so let's not talk about all of the white people and the people in power who perpetuated and started the slave trade, but instead let's just really focus on how we definitely ended it, and white people were really involved in ending the horrendous crime that they were committing as well as starting and perpetuating them.
So
anyway,
we've acknowledged sad history facts. We've acknowledged white saviorism.
Yes.
We will now talk about this movie based on a true person, which definitely took creative liberties. So I think just keep in mind that as we talk about these characters, we're talking about them in a semi-fictional way, I think, just since we don't have mm-hmm. true historic facts on these things. But it is kind of, in addition to being a very moving historical drama, it's also a romance. So
yeah. And it's a romance that was written by a woman who was born in Nigeria. Mm-hmm. And while I can't find pictures of her, everything seems to indicate that she was a Black woman.
Yeah.
Or still is. She seems to still be alive.
Yeah, I noticed that when the credits were rolling. So I love seeing even if they're not like 100% historically accurate, because that's hard to do in Hollywood. If you want that, you have to go find like some kind of an indie film. But I love when movies kind of shine a light on people that we wouldn't otherwise kind of think about. At least the average, I think, white audience member maybe wouldn't think about when thinking about historical things.
Yeah.
So that was one of the first things that got me really excited. I was like, ooh, a story about a Black woman in this like time period, which I normally never see that. And she looks amazing and looks like she's doing cool things. I want to see her story. So that was one thing that got me really excited to go. I also am personally obsessed with anything that's talking about, you know, people who from different cultures and backgrounds who are coming together and finding connections and falling in love. And so I love that with our main love interest with Belle and John. I want to say, I guess maybe I should save John for later, because I think my first note, and maybe you think of this as partially some of the white saviorism, but oh my God, do I fucking love her dad, like her actual birth father. So we have this opening scene where this guy who looks like a colonel, no, not Beckett. He looks like, wait, is Beckett the name of the guy that Elizabeth is supposed to marry in the Pirates of the Caribbean movies? No, that's Norrington. He looks like Commodore Norrington, but like more handsome. So he's like, if you took Commodore Norrington and you like bumped him up a couple of handsome notches, he is at this port. He's looking to go collect his daughter, and he's just instantly like, oh my gosh, you're so lovely, you're my daughter, you're wonderful, you're perfect, I brought you chocolate, I'm going to take you away from here, like picking her up and being all sweet. But yeah, that note that is made later after he drops her off, which first of all, again, wonderful. The whole family is appalled. They're like, she's Black, what are you talking about? And he's like,
and their response is very much like, you understand we can't do this, right? And he goes, you understand you have to do this, right?
Exactly. And he's like, no. This is my daughter. She's your blood. She's perfect. And you are going to take care of her and treat her like a princess, because that's exactly what she is. And it's so dang sweet. And I so wish he didn't have to go off to the sea and be a sailor and do things and could take his daughter with him. But it's mentioned later when the aunt and uncle are talking after he's left, and they're kind of observing their new ward. And they have some mention, that Belle's mother, or Dido's mother, was on a slave ship that he like intercepted and like freed these people. I need that backstory romance as a movie. Holy cow, that sounds amazing.
Yeah, I do get the impression from the history facts that I've looked at that is fully fictionalized.
Probably not real.
Everything about her dad is super fictionalized.
Probably.
But also, I think this was the reason why I wanted to start with like the real facts. I think the real facts matter, and it matters that we understand that, and it matters that we go in with this context. But it also matters that we can watch something and just like for a bit put on that little bit of like a romance lens and be like, maybe he loved her. Like maybe he really, like maybe it wasn't gross and terrible. Maybe he loved her and he went and took his daughter because he loved her enough to put her in a place where she was going to be, at least by the people who he trusted, treated as close to an equal as they quote unquote could. They could have done more. But I think that's like part of what I was trying to remind myself of, because I do love this movie and I do like the cute kissing parts. And I do like the idea that people were able to overcome prejudices in that way.
Yeah.
I don't know that the reality worked out that way.
Who knows? But in the context of this film, it's lovely.
Yeah. And I also like that they didn't make it too, like, it wasn't like, and now we're out here fighting against racism and fighting tens. Like, they were like, no, we're still like pretty deep in this system. But it is like when you have that personal understanding and personal relationship with something, your ability to be like, I can understand something as intellectually wrong. And then I can see a person that I care about and understand it on a different level.
Yeah.
And I think there was this it was uncomfortable how well it was portrayed. The expectation that she constantly be grateful for all of these things she's been given, while constantly being given slightly less than her direct comparison with her sister, which I thought was really well. I felt really uncomfortable about it in like a you did a good job movie way.
Yeah. I think it's interesting though that the movie, it does feel like it's constantly kind of it's not trying to tuck this under the rug. It is constantly kind of saying, like, yes, it's clear that Elizabeth, that's her kind of essentially like adoptive sister. Elizabeth is like, she gets more like, I don't know, rights than Dido does, even within the household. But then there's this whole thing that's constantly brought like to light, is this fact that Elizabeth has no money. Like, and there's this comment later that she says to Dido when they're riding in the carriage and they're headed off to London to go have their like coming out into society. And she makes this remark of her being like, you in some kind of way with your financial stability, which I think the fact that her father, again, who knows about facts, but in the film, that he left her like this incredible dowry, very much loved her and wanted to provide for her. But so when they're riding there, Dido has this fortune, so she doesn't need to husband hunt. She has an element of freedom of choice, which Elizabeth is not granted. And she has this kind of thing about, she's like, I am beneath you in some way, and in that sense, and I now have to like sacrifice, love and other things just to like belong to this guy. And so I think that's interesting that debate is kind of always brought up and sort of circling around one another. This idea of privilege based on race versus freedom based on money. Yeah.
Well, and I think like it is that like, it's that interesting thing of like, she is in such a middle position with all of these things because she's never actually going to get to access the privilege that money would have brought her if she had been white.
Right.
Which I think is really interesting. Speaking of the money, I love to know the actual amount of money that things are.
Yeah.
So it was £2,000 a year was what she got. Do you want to do a guess of in today's US dollars how much money that was?
Let's say $400,000.
$206,000 every year.
Nice. That's awesome. That guy made a bunch of money.
Well, an income we've talked about before is based off of like, you have certain things that you own, and then people like pay rent and other things off of that, and then you get to have that money. So anytime they're talking about a certain amount of income a year, that's what they're referring to.
Yeah.
It's not like she's making interest off of a savings or something. It's some combination of those things. She has a certain amount, she's inherited a certain amount of holdings, and then she gets money off of that.
Yeah.
But that's wild.
That's a lot of money.
That is like really, I would also not marry a man, but for probably additional reasons.
Nice. So before we get out of childhood and into Elizabeth and Dido's years of like needing to like start courting and everything, I just want to say that it's like, as we see her as a little girl for this brief amount of time in the house, like one of the first interactions that she has with her adoptive father, this judge, is she's, in this kind of hall full of paintings and she's checking everything out. And so paintings play a part throughout this story. And it's the first time when she's kind of like speaking with him that she's kind of looking at these paintings and seeing how people are portrayed in art. And that is something that we're going to discuss further later on. But anyway, she and Elizabeth are super adorable. She watches Elizabeth dance like a funny little rabbit. I love how right away when essentially the woman who's become like the housekeeper is like, talking to them, and like Elizabeth's just like being so mouthy, and she's like, everyone says you're an old maid. Tee. And she's like, you are unloved, and just like yelling at her and like chases her off.
Let's talk about the aunt for a little bit, because so that is their great aunt essentially. So the man who's like their adoptive father is their collective dad's uncle.
Yes.
And he doesn't have any kids of his own. And so they are both living as wards in his house. He treats them like his daughters. And it's Elizabeth's father will inherit, but she has a bitchy stepmom who won't let her have any of the money. So she is literally going to be homeless if this man dies before, because her dad just wouldn't take care of her at all, which I can't even imagine. Anyway,
I know, especially how just freaking cute that little kid is. Like, yes, she's precocious, but whatever. He's off in Paris, like banging his new wife, who's like,
this is great,
pouring poison in his ear. It's like, abandon your first child, and he's like, okay.
Sorry, that's my impression of her dad.
I like it. Yeah, it's nice.
But I really liked how they did that transition from childhood to adulthood, because she like gets up and starts running around and is a little bit more comfortable and has this like sister, and it's like Elizabeth was much in need of a companion. And then she runs around the tree, and they're adults or young adults. They're supposed to be like just about to come out, which makes them like late teens, early 20s.
Yeah.
But very cute. Love their friendship.
It's so dang sweet. They share a room.
It's
they're
so
like, they're
cute.
roommates. It's adorable. Yeah. Like we often get many scenes of them just kind of like chilling in bed after like, you know, lights out, and they're just kind of chatting about things. So it's very sweet. You can tell they have a very close relationship.
And they get, it seems that they've had a very sheltered life.
Yes.
Because they understand the rules as they exist in the house, but they're both somewhat surprised by Elizabeth is pretty naive when it comes to what people are looking for when they want to do kisses with her. And then also Dido's not naive necessarily, but she is often put in positions where her experiences of people being racist is jarring.
Yes. Well, I think Dido's whole thing is, as you kind of mentioned in your summary, is that she's kind of caught in this weird in-between where because she's a person of color, she cannot like mix and mingle necessarily with the upper crusts that are of the same like financial standing as her. But she is like of noble blood. She's like a highborn. She has all this money. So it's also considered beneath her to mingle with people who are not within that social class. So it's kind of essentially like you have to live in this bubble and like not really talk to people. Essentially, the way that she's grown up in this household, she has this small family network, and I think it's very obvious that just through the interactions she has with some of the servants, especially the coachman who helps her out, becomes her wingman. Like all these people, you know, they treat her just like she's super normal, any other person, member of the family, it seems, because they've been with her since she was a little kid too. So yes, I think she hasn't had access to the world beyond this fancy house to know how people kind of treat her or react around her.
Well, and I think it's an interesting thing that I think we still in some ways see a lot of today. And I think there's a lot of things in this where I was like, that is maybe a representation of what happened then, but certainly a great like metaphoric representation of what happens now, because there is this element of she can't socialize with people who are beneath, quote unquote, beneath her, because it would bring her down to their level. And I think it's an interesting thing that, especially in period dramas and things like that, where we can see this like strict social structure that the only direction you could possibly want to go is one way, and that's up. And it's interesting because it's at every point during this movie, the only option that is acceptable to her family is one that gets her more of a proximity to whiteness and power, where that is an incredibly lonely position to put her in.
Of course. Yeah.
And very isolating. And it's interesting to me the way that speaks to us today of like, we still in a lot of ways only really support people when they want more of a proximity to power, and those power structures tend to be white and they tend to be male. And if people choose to do things that distance themselves from that, we still hear people talk about it like they're making a mistake by distancing themselves from power. And I think that's an interesting parallel.
It is, for sure. So one thing that kind of starts to really shake things up is the fact that this other wealthy family is coming over, and especially the fact that it's going to be these two young men, these eligible young men who are coming to the house. And so it's the first time the girls are like, oh, maybe these are potential suitors, tee-hee-hee. At least Elizabeth especially. I think they're both kind of giddy about it, but Elizabeth especially is very much like boy crazy, kind of like very excited to like go out and meet men and all this stuff. So
well, and I think Dido's aware of the reality of that for her a bit more.
Yes. And so we get one of them is just Draco Malfoy.
Yeah, he's Draco Malfoy playing Draco Malfoy as the, like, instead of the metaphor of racism with muggles, he's just fully being racist.
Well, I had a note here and it's like, how can you make Draco Malfoy even more unlikable? Make him a racist creep.
Which, like, honestly, he kind of is.
Yeah.
He's just more upfront about it in this. Oh, he's just the worst. He makes me so angry. But I also think that he plays a really interesting role in the story of, like, being the worst, being obviously racist to her, but also being the counter to other people who are, like, racist in a more subtle way.
Yes.
Where it's like, he's the easy villain.
Right.
He's the easy one to hate. He's the one you see the first time you see him on screen. You're like, you fucking suck.
Exactly. So he comes in with a permanent sneer on his face and a hideous wig. And I totally thought he was the elder brother just by looks. But the taller...
He is.
Yeah. Well, no, sorry, younger one. The taller, hotter guy is the younger brother. But hot guy takes a liking to Dido. And his mother's all like, don't you dare sleep with her. And he's like, psh, maybe I will.
I get to do whatever I want. I'm hot and tall and white and connected to a rich family.
Exactly. Also, Mom, did you hear this lady's got money? And the mom's like, oh, well, maybe you can bang her, but marry her first. So the mom is money grubbing, also very racist against Dido. Draco Malfoy, obviously blatantly racist, but has his eyes on Elizabeth. And hot, tall brother, still racist, but at least he's like, oh, hey, Dido seems like she might be cool. She's really pretty, and she can play piano, and she's got a bunch of money. So maybe I'll make a move on that.
The grossest conversation these men have, and I can't remember if it happens the first time they meet them or a later time. I think it's the first time they meet them, though. They have the grossest conversations where he's like, why wouldn't you want an exotic flower? And he goes, exotic flowers are for when you, like, go off to the West Indies and fuck a slave on a farm, not for having in your house. In your house, you need a perfect English rose.
Barf. Barf, barf, barf. Which honestly made me kind of think about some things in Jane Eyre. Like at the end, Rochester was after that English rose, but anyway. So yeah, there's this whole thing. I also made a note that I love when the aunt is preparing them to meet these young gentlemen. She's like, you better not say anything in Italian and God forbid French. And instantly, like, she's like,
that's the second, like, most Jane Eyre thing in this, is they're despising the French.
Well, yes, but I also love that she's like, the blessed French, to be like, I don't hate them. She does. But my note there was like, okay, you taught these girls how to speak Italian, Latin, and French, but God forbid if you utter one word in that language. Like, wow. So
because speaking French to a man who comes to dinner,
ooh, it's sassy. But
what are you trying to do?
Ooh, she wants it, but too bad for her. She wants it, but too bad for her. Frickin' Draco is an idiot and doesn't speak French because he's an uncultured swine. So it's also on this evening where Dido first meets her one true love, John, and I don't know his last name off the top of my head.
John is all we need to know.
John is all we need to know. She's out taking a walk because she's not allowed to have dinner with the family, but she is allowed to meet everybody in the drawing room because that's what the social rules say. So while she's waiting for them to finish eating, she goes for a walk outside and gets startled by somebody rustling through the bushes. So goes...
Which I fully forgot that's how she met him.
Yeah.
So I was worried for her.
So she goes back to be like, I think there's poachers on the loose. But then up comes John, a sweet boy who is the son of the local vicar. And he is coming to become potentially the, what would you say, apprentice. He wants to be essentially like an apprentice. I knocked over my microphone. He wants to...
Keep it in.
He wants to be the apprentice to Elizabeth and Dido's essentially father, and learn all about law because he wants to become a lawyer and like someday work in like the high courts and all that stuff because he's got a heart full of justice and he wants to change the world for the better and all this jazz. So that's their first meeting. It doesn't go well. She's all appalled. She's like, we've not been formally introduced. How dare you speak to me? Blah, blah, blah. I'm hoity-toity. And he's like, okay.
Which
bye.
I do think is really interesting. It's such an interesting scene. It's so well done. And I think what I loved about it was it's one of those things that you see where like sometimes people who are treated poorly by certain social rules are the ones who are often enforcing those rules.
For sure. Because
I'm sure she's had lots of situations where people who come to the house, don't treat her with any level of respect. And she's the one who has to enforce that. So if he hadn't been this swoony man who we love very much and had instead been someone as gross as the guys in the dining room, and he had come in and just started talking to her and treating her like she was just any old somebody, that would have been insulting.
Yeah.
Like the lack of, it's similar to when Rochester and Jane Eyre, because I'm coming back to it, is talking to Jane and is like, will you forgive me for setting aside formalities and like not think of it as like me being indignant or like not indignant, whatever it's called. Impertinent.
There we go. You did
That's
it.
the word I was looking for. Which like the reason for that is you would think somebody in power speaking to you informally would be like elevating you to their level, but instead it's saying societal rules don't matter and your station doesn't matter. And I'm so high above you, I can do whatever I want. And so him coming in and just talking to her is actually insulting because it's ignoring those societal rules. But the way she behaves, he's like, oh my God, you're like so stuck up. And like, because if Elizabeth was doing the same thing, that would be what we would think about her.
Right. Well, the thing is that I love that he comes up to the door because he wants to apologize for startling her. And like this, I know this like butler, whoever answers it. And he's like, oh, I just wanted to say that I think I might have frightened the young lady of the house. And she's standing there too. And she's like, we have not been introduced. How dare you? And all this stuff. So.
Because he tries to talk to her immediately instead of, he's like, oh my God, there you are. I'm so sorry. I did that. I'm like such an idiot. I was just taking a shortcut.
Yeah. So, John gets accepted as apprentice to this judge, and there's lots of interesting conversations with him and essentially Dido's dad, which I'm just going to keep saying essentially Dido's dad.
We're going to call her, she calls him Papa.
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 And I think it's interesting that scene in the library where Dido is also there because she's collecting these books. She came in to complain because it's been announced to her that she and Elizabeth will have their portrait painted, and this alarms her. So she goes into the library to go talk to Papa, and he's in there with John. And so she kind of lingers, like grabbing these books and stuff. And John is talking to Papa about how he wants to elevate himself in society. And I think it's very interesting that both, even though they're very different kind of barricades, both Dido and John have social obstacles preventing them from, their happiness and what they want and their goals. Because obviously where she has this whole, people don't accept her because of the color of her skin, he is not accepted in these higher levels of like education and lawmaking and things like this because he comes from like a low class background by their, thought process anyway. So yeah, we get this cute scene. I think it's then not long after where, the stuff about, getting the portrait painted is kind of revealed. And at first, so I'm going to say this and then I'm going to circle back. I love that John isn't immediately just like perfect in this time period because like that would be unbelievable. So he goes through his own level of growth. But so as we've established, his first interaction with Dido is that she seemed kind of snooty. He then sees her being so distraught about this idea of getting her portrait painted. And he also kind of ridicules her. He's like, oh, wow, like boo-hoo, poor rich girl. And then later he comes back to her realizing what the issue is and he apologizes for it. And it's so cute. But Lillian, thoughts on these moments for them?
It's great. It's my favorite kind of period drama thing where they immediately have this like tension between them where they both think the other one is like she thinks he's being this like impertinent, snooty little like ladder climber. And he's like, she thinks that she's above everything. She's this spoiled little rich girl. And they both come to realize that that's not true. And they do it in the only way you possibly can in a period drama, which is a montage of longing glances.
Yeah, so
Let's look at each other with longing glances all day long.
Oh my gosh.
I love it so much. These two actors are incredible at longing glances.
They're so good. And I love kind of as they, get to know one another better, which I think really starts to happen after Dido, I think while in that room, she overhears things about what did he say the name of the ship was?
Zong case.
The Zong case. And John starts kind of informing her about this because she didn't know anything about it. And because she has lived such a sheltered life, she doesn't take immediately the same kind of stance against it that he does, and he's offended by that, but she doesn't have the information.
It's partly because she says, I can't believe that happened.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe that happened.
Yeah.
I can't believe that people did that. And it's because her papa has been sheltering her from that, and sheltering her from the realities of that, which is, it's a classic thing that, again, parents still today try to do. They go, I know. I'm not going to go into that because there's I don't want to, I did my bummer facts for the episode already. But it's a classic thing that parents do, where they're like, I'm going to just not talk to my kids about race because then it's not going to be a problem. And it's like, no, then they're just going to be ignorant. Yeah. It's very much the, I'm going to be colorblind. It's like, that's not how anything works still.
Right.
And I think it's an interesting way to show that, because people, we still do this in the Midwest. We do this a lot in period dramas. They do it a lot where it's speaking in this almost code where it's a shared language. It's a shared set of experiences. Mm-hmm. So he's speaking to her in that way, assuming she has context. She doesn't. Yeah. And so the conclusions she comes to are wrong. And then in one of their second or third conversations, she just straight up and down says to him, you have to explain this to me. I don't understand. I'm not being a bitch. I don't understand.
Yeah. And I think that's such a pivotal moment for them, at least for him, especially, to be like, oh, wait, I really like you. Yes, it's her coming and being like, no, it's not. Yeah, I'm not ignorant. I just don't have access to this information. So help me.
Yeah. I'm not being I'm not going, slaves are not me, and so they can die. I don't care. Mm-hmm. I literally don't understand what you're saying. Yeah. I do not have the context that you have, and I'm prevented from having that information by someone who thinks he's protecting me and absolutely is not.
Absolutely. So once they have these moments and they start, she starts learning from him and he starts learning from her, because I think they both go through a nice amount of growth and development.
And the sexual tension builds really intensely.
I was going to say, so, because they go to London, which we kind of already chatted about. It's
which fully he gets fired by her dad.
Yes.
Her papa fires him. He's like, you talked to my adoptive daughter about things that affect her life directly. How dare you? Get out.
He's like, I've worked long and hard to shelter her, and you're making her insanely woke, so get out of my house. Don't do that.
She just realized slavery is bad, in a real big way. And I blame you for that.
Yeah, you're fired. I'm not going to teach you anymore. So now John has to go try and make his own way. But yes, so the girls are going to London for their coming out. And it's announced that even though Dido is going to be there with Elizabeth, the parents anyway assume that no man of stature is going to propose to her. So they're like, just take these spinster keys before you go, because it's the fate that awaits you.
What a bummer. And he thinks that she's going to be thrilled.
Yeah. He's like, you get to be housekeeper now, just like your dried up old aunt. And she's like, no, that's not
my
me.
sister, who you guys make fun of for being pathetic and old and alone all the time.
Yeah.
Who frankly is kind of annoying because she's also deeply enforcing rules that are actively holding her back. You're going to be her.
Yeah.
I'm going to turn you into her because I think that's the best life someone like you could possibly have. Boop.
Woo,
goodbye.
See you later. So they head off to London, and that's where we get that awesome discussion in the carriage ride between Elizabeth and Belle, of Elizabeth saying, in some ways, you have a freedom that I don't. Women are property to men. And there's this whole kind of discussion there. But that aside, they start parading around and meeting dudes. And they're both still have their eyes on Draco Malfoy and his brother, because those guys are kind of pursuing them.
Which I think those are their names in the show,
yeah,
too.
Draco Malfoy and his brother.
We didn't forget and not pay attention to the names of these incredibly racist assholes.
But it's while...
that's their names in the movie.
Exactly. It's while they're at the Pleasure Gardens, which is what they refer to them as later on.
Ooh!
They call them the Pleasure Gardens, where all these young folks are out looking at fireworks and listening to music and mingling, where Dido makes eye contact across a crowd multiple times with John, and it's so cute.
It's so cute, you guys.
Yo, he comes over, he's all excited to see her because they haven't, her papa forbade him from like going near Dido again, but they're out in public and they ran into each other, so might as well say hi. And she's there.
And Piper just did a little shoulder shimmy. That is also what he did.
Oh yeah.
For real.
Oh yeah. Dido is kind of there with semi-racist brother, and so it's all this whole weird thing. But we do get a cute moment where she goes to talk to John, and he is afraid that they'll be seen together, not because of her race, but because it's improper for like a young lady and a young man to be off together unchaperoned.
Well, and also her father specifically said, I'll ruin your whole life if you ever talk to her again.
Exactly. And he sees that her family is coming, so he like grabs Belle, pulls her behind this bush, and it's like there's a whole like moment of him like pulling her waist close to him, and they're all like, oh, we're breathing next to each other's faces, and it's lovely.
It's so good.
Oofda. Love it. Also, I fucking love the remark when she runs off with semi-racist brother, and her like aunt says, she's like, oh no, people will think she has no family. And it's like, that's not what they're gonna think. Like, you sweet dumb lady.
I think, honestly, I do think that that's a little bit true, but I also think it's like, that woman has more awareness than a lot of the other people in this.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's dangerous for her to be alone, and it's dangerous for any woman to be like not with someone who they trust enough to protect her, but it's probably extra dangerous for Dido because there's so many people who would think that no one would care about this like pretty black girl that's walking around this party.
Yeah.
And so when she says they're going to think she has no family, that's, I think, another code of like, they're going to think that nobody will care if they hurt this girl.
Yeah.
And we do. And we need her to be seen with us
for sure,
so that they know that someone will care if you hurt her.
Exactly. The awful racist mom who's hanging out with them then says like, no, they'll think that she's having an affair, all this stuff, because she's like, ooh,
they're courting,
yes.
Not having an affair.
Whatever. It was, she already told her son, don't fuck that girl. So she's like, clearly knows that her sons are banging broads.
Oh my God.
But it's revealed at this party that Elizabeth has no money. And so the racist mom tells Draco this, and he's disgusted, and he's like, oh God, gross. I almost married that lady. So it's kind of like,
well, and they do this thing, like they sort of allude to this. We don't see it on screen as much, but they allude to the idea that he keeps stringing Elizabeth along because he can. Mm-hmm. So Elizabeth keeps being like, he keeps saying he's going to propose to me, and I think he's going to propose to me. And I'm just like, oh, he sucks.
I know, poor sweet Elizabeth. So yes, the one brother pulls out, but the other brother decides the other brother goes all the way. And he proposes to Dido. And so I want to talk about his feelings when it comes to later on in their relationship, but Dido accepts. She's engaged to this guy, and now that they're in London, she has all these more interactions with John, where she is kind of sneaking off to meet him, and she's gotten information from her papa about the case, and she's learning more about it, and she's sneaking info to John, and they start having all these kind of like sneaky little rendezvous. But the spark is a flamin', and she does tell him that she's engaged.
So good.
But he also tells her that he's technically engaged, but he didn't do the proposing. His mom was like, marry the coach. His aunt is like, marry the coachmaker's daughter. So they both have people they're proposed to, but they're clearly having way more fun hanging out together.
Yeah. And those are like my favorite scenes. And it's so well like cut together of like her sneaking out and this happening and that happening. And then her papa sees her, but she doesn't see her papa see her. And then the coachman who's supposed to be her friend, betrays her.
Which they keep having these, she and John keep having these secret meetings inside of the coach. And she goes one day to like have one of those again. But then her papa has also like, he has followed them, and he gets in the coach to like, confront the two of them. And he's like, how dare you do this? Like,
this is the best. If you are a Jane Eyre fan, if you are a period drama fan, this scene I might just go watch it 10 times after this. It's so good.
It is
Piper, tell us about it.
So good. So Papa is yelling at John, and he's like, you can't like do this to her. You're gonna like bring down her reputation, and you're not good enough for her, and all this jazz. And he like, I don't know if the father says the L word first, but John has this outburst, and he says, "I love her with every breath that I breathe." He like yells at the dad. His outward declaration of love for Dido.
He slips out the love word, and then the papa's like, "You don't love her." And he yell. It's so good. It's so sexy. It's so passionate.
So I wrote down a question here for you, Lillian, since you consume so much romance literature.
Yes.
How do you feel about, like, at least when it comes to like the first declaration of love, how do you feel about the first declaration of love made in front of others versus a one-on-one?
I like declarations of love that are like, I cannot keep this in anymore. And so I don't care if it's like if it's in front of other people. Like, I love a declaration of love that's like, they both sort of think that they're the only one in love, and there are reasons that feel real that they can't be together. And then one of them is just like, obviously I'm in love with her.
Yeah.
She's the greatest person who's ever lived.
Yeah.
How could I not be in love with her? And maybe you suck.
No, it's so sweet. It's a wonderful moment. And so how, of course, can she and John turn back from this?
How about you? Do you want it to be public or private?
I have mixed feelings. It really depends, obviously, on the details of the situation. But because one thing I was thinking is like, yes, this is such a passionate, wonderful like declaration, but also he wasn't like looking at Belle when he said it. He was looking at the father, and so it's kind of one of those things where I'm kind of like, well, I kind of wish you had said it to me, but I'm also here, so I'm glad that I overheard and I know this now. I don't know. I think there's something to be said about like, are you is it a performative act? Not in this situation, but like when making a big declaration of love in front of other people, is that a performative gesture? Like, is it more meaningful when it's just two people? But I think also you could argue doing it in front of other people, potentially you could say you're not simply like playing up for just the person to say what they want to hear. You don't care who else is around, and like, others be damned, I'm saying this and this is how I feel. So I don't know, it's mixed.
Yeah, and I think I like the way they do it in this because it's like, he sort of didn't, like, if he had planned to say I love you and had done that and was like, I'm going to do it in front of your dad. That's not my favorite. But I also like it when people are in fights in private and they're like, because I love you. Yeah. And I'm like, do it.
Ooh, yeah.
So I in fiction really enjoy it when the way people say I love you is like, there's so much of this feeling inside of them and they literally can't. My other favorite is when they do it by accident because they've thought it in their head so many times and then they say it out loud. That just happened in a book that I'm reading. Cute. This guy says, I love you. And it's like a dual perspective thing. He says it. He in his head, he's like, thank God she didn't notice and she is acting cool because she obviously is not going to love someone as horrible as me. And then we get her reaction to the same scene and she's like, he obviously said it by mistake because people say that all the time. And he doesn't actually love me.
Oh goodness.
This had the same vibe of her being like, you love me? And him being like, obviously.
Yes, but also,
how could I not love you?
Wasn't planning on saying it in like this way, but now it's out, I guess. Speaking of declarations of love about Dido, I wrote down two quotes that her papa says about his feelings for her. They are not like when Dido is in the room. These are things that he says to his wife. One of them he says to Dido. And the first quote that I have here is, you are most cherished, most loved. That's what he says to her. I think when she's, asking if her being the housekeeper is a punishment. So I love that he says that affirmation of love is very important to hear. And then there's another moment where he's talking with his wife, and she asks him if he loves Dido, and he says, as if she were created of you and me. There's a lot of really sweet,
which is very cute, because those two are very clearly in love, and you sort of get the vibe that they couldn't have kids, and that's one of the reasons why they love these two girls so well.
Yeah. Oh, there's so many sweet things. So, Dido hears this declaration of love. She knows that she loves him too. She calls off her engagement with semi-racist brother. And I want to talk about the scene where they call the mom and the brother over to break up.
Can I sneak one more scene that happens in between there?
Yes.
So we see the papa, go like to this like place that lawyers hang out, where John and his cronies are hanging out. So it's like after this speech, and knowing that like Dido loves, he like goes and like sits at a different table but listens to him talk, and he gives an incredible speech that I think is really, really well done, because he is highly critical of the systems as opposed to individuals within that system, which I think is a really great, like that's another one where it's like they're sneaking in some really great social commentary about today in a kissy movie period drama, which I enjoy.
Yeah, totally.
You did it. So I really liked that.
That was great.
That view, because there is a bit of like, here are all these racist people and Draco Malfoy's the problem. And it's like, no, Draco Malfoy's a problem.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Which, speaking of Draco Malfoy being a problem, at one point he inappropriately grabs Dido and he tells her to her face that he will never marry Elizabeth and she's been sport for him, and no one would ever want to touch Dido, even though he just did, and it's gross and he's the worst. And so every time that Elizabeth feels as if he might like turn around and be a good guy again, Dido shuts her down. She's like, no, like let that guy alone. And Elizabeth is hurt because she's like, you have a fortune, you have a guy who wants to marry you. All I want is to like marry that guy's brother and then we'll be sisters. Why are you being so mean to me? And they have this fight. And I remember loving this so much from the first time I saw this movie, because Elizabeth is like, my note here is like, oh, poor sweet dumb Elizabeth. Like, she's like so like genuine and clueless. And when she's having this fight with Dido, starts to kind of hint at like something, like she might say something like really bad, of being like, she's like, you know why like people like don't like you and all this other stuff. And Dido's like, fucking say it to my face. And she's like, it's because you're illegitimate. And it's just like, she's like, oh my God, you dumb dummy. Yeah, my dad like isn't with me and my mom isn't with me, but also it's because I'm black. Come on. like you moron. And it's just like so sweet, and she's so oblivious. And I think that moment was really cute.
It is cute. I think it's also an example of like, just to make it a metaphor for things today again, where it's like, if you, just because you have a black friend doesn't mean you're not racist.
Right, exactly.
Because yes, Elizabeth's racism is from ignorance, but it's still doing a problem. Because I think it's such a great example of something that we see so much. We see it with the aunt. We see it in moments when Dido is enforcing the social rules for her to succeed. We see it when other people are doing similar things. Of Elizabeth is also grabbing onto the one thing that makes her better than other people too.
Yeah.
So she's like, I don't have the money. I don't have the freedom. I don't have these other things that you have, but I am legitimate and I'm allowed to eat at dinner. And I'm just it's that way that like it goes into that subconscious stuff that goes into your head that tells Elizabeth since she was a little girl, you're a little bit better than Dido. And then when she sees Dido getting the things that she wants, that's when she gets mad. Because what she wants to be the person opening the door. She doesn't want to be the person who's now put in a position where she has less power and less control than her sister.
Right. But I think it's so interesting that when she calls her illegitimate, because she's talking about how the fact that like essentially she's a bastard, like her mom is dead and her dad like didn't raise her. But then the fact that Dido is able to turn it on her immediately, and she's like, you're the one legitimately who your father actually actively left you. Like, you're the illegitimate one. Like, what are you doing? So Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which, like, it is that thing where the people who know you best are the ones who can hurt you the deepest,
right,
because they know what you actually are afraid of.
Exactly. So, with that in mind, we have this scene where Dido breaks off the engagement, and the racist mother is like aghast, and she's like, "Oh my god, like I can't even believe this is happening." But what I think is so interesting about that scene is the way that the actor who plays the less racist brother is reacting in that scene, because I think he does look genuinely sad and hurt. Now, he is still very much like a racist person and like would not treat Belle with the respect that John would, because that's the thing, is that he like admires her, but he does not respect her or view her as an equal. Therefore their marriage could never happen because it's just not a thing. But I think there is a level of him being like, he's sad by this. I mean, he liked Dido, and I think he's upset by the...
I think he really liked her money a lot.
Okay. I don't know. I read like hurt emotion in his expressions when he was like in that scene. So I don't know. I think he is someone who definitely has like subconscious racist thoughts, but thought he was being really good and like would be caring towards her. I don't know.
I think he's subconscious, some for sure, but they were pretty fucking conscious when in the proposal he said, "I can overlook your other origins because your better half is clearly the part that like," so I agree with you in that I think he thought something was happening, that like, I think that he like thought he was going to have this hot wife, but I think like it wasn't about who she is. It's about, he wanted the exotic flower, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think, I don't know. I'd be just interested to like hear other people's take on his character. Cause I feel like definitely the way that he viewed her was not like good, but I think he thought that he's like, I care for her and I'm better than all these other racist fucks. Like I'm not the bad guy.
But I think he wanted a pat on the back,
right? Yeah,
for not like being willing to marry her.
Of course, yes.
Like he thought he deserved a reward, and she should just be grateful forever.
Yeah,
and that's what he would have expected of their marriage, was that she would just be grateful forever. And I think that my favorite part of that scene, which I'm assuming you're getting to, is the moment where the mother is saying all these vicious things. He's like he like looks surprised and somewhat saddened. But Belle breaks, and it's the first time we see her be like, "Are you fucking kidding me? Why would you possibly think I would want to join a family that sees me the way that you're describing me?
Yeah.
Like, this is how you think that I am, and you think that's what I want for my life? Like, you think you were doing me this huge favor. I have a massive amount of money. I'm rich forever. I'm fine. I don't need you. And you're acting like I'm the one being bad in this situation. Go fuck yourself."
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah.
And some people who are recalling the film, they're like, I don't remember when she said go fuck yourself. You know, it's subtext.
She does. Yeah. It's definitely text.
So yeah, she breaks that off. My next big note is about how it's a time crunch on the decision for this case. And I really love the scene where the racist family, their father is like walking through this library with Papa, and he's asking him, he's like, there are some people who are thinking that because you have raised this mixed raced child that you are going to weigh in favor of the insurance company, and maybe you're biased, and maybe this isn't the way that you should be doing this or whatever. And he gives this great response because he's very much a man he's like, the law is the law is the law. And do you remember what that exact line is, where he's like, may justice be served even if the heavens should fall, something like that he says?
Yeah. That's really close to it. I don't have it written down though.
Yeah. And he has a conversation like this with John where he's talking about how he's like, the only thing that can like keep us as a civilized society is the fact that we have like, a justice system and laws that are decided. And that is different from what people view as right and wrong, perhaps, but people can change these things and they can use it to make society better. But this is how we govern. And he's someone who very much like believes in that. And he gives a response to this dad from the like racist family talking about, he's like, I don't remember the exact words, but he's like, no, if everything is like put forward the way that it should be and the facts are true or whatever, then this case will be as just as like the blood of Dido runs through my veins. He's got like something where it's like, she is my blood, but also like I listen to the rules and that's what matters. So we get this scene where John runs after Papa after seeing him in one of these like legal kind of like common areas. And he's like yelling at him and he's like, you need to make the right choice and blah, blah, blah. And think of Dido and all this stuff. And they have this whole thing. I personally feel, because the father character in this, I think he's someone who like feels very deeply, but keeps that all kind of like, you know, under the surface and doesn't really reveal it in a like emotional way, the way that like some of the other characters do. I feel like when John confronts Papa in the carriage, I think Papa has already made the decision. He's like, oh no, I'm going to be like making sure that the people who killed all those human beings on that boat are going to be held responsible. But he's just not like outwardly showing it, you know? He's playing his cards close to the vest. He knows what's riding on this, and he can't let other people you know, be aware of which way he's leaning to like influence him. So that's kind of the vibe that I got from that scene.
Yeah, I do. I think he probably is like making a decision and kind of going back and forth. I think it is an incredibly interesting conversation. And I think what I took away from that scene was the perspective that arguably like moderate, like it's this like arguably moderate perspective of like, well, slavery's bad, but the economy, like that's essentially like the argument being made. Like that's the argument that racist dad is making to racist family dad is making to Papa. And I think the argument that John makes is so interesting to me and is the one that I honestly find more compelling, which is if the law, yes, the law is the law, but if the law is upholding something that is inherently abhorrent and is in and of itself so immoral that we can't possibly enforce it, that we have an obligation to go against the law.
Yeah.
And that's what I like. It is this, I think the view that that Papa talks about is definitely like, I don't know about you, but it's the like way I was raised as a little kid of like, well, there's rules and you follow the rules. If the rules are bad, we can work to change the rules, but you have to follow the rules. And the argument that John is making is much more, there are rules. Some of those rules fucking suck. And if there's slavery, you shouldn't follow the rules because it's actually morally worse to be on the side of the rules when the rules are slavery.
Yeah, for sure. I think John is much more the person who's like kind of, I mean, he's a young, like passionate guy. And so he's much more of the like tear down the system and rebuild it or whatever. And Papa is much more like slow and steady changes to make a greater good over time. So they just come from two different.
Is the next conversation is the one that I really loved as well, which was between Papa and Mama.
Yes, go for it.
When Mama is like, you used to be him.
Yeah.
He sounds like who you were.
Right, exactly. He's like, there was a time when you two thought you would change the world. And yeah, I think so. I think Papa sees young himself in John. I think for a while he's known kind of like what he feels is right. And I think it's just been sort of him sort of like, I need the judicial evidence to support this, to make this ruling and all that jazz. Yeah. It's the day of the case. Dido runs out to go sneak off and see it in person. The ruling is, surprise, favorable. Yay! He decides that people who murder human beings are bad. And he has all kinds of wonderful lines. I'm saying this like a dummy. It's a scene that should be watched and admired, I think, because he has this line at the end that really stood out to me, which is when he's making his ruling about it. He's like, not only is it like just within the eyes of the law, it is also morally right. Yeah. And so he gets that in there as well. Yeah.
And it was a good scene. Obviously, there's no fucking way she was there. And I also, here's how you know I watch a lot of period dramas, is I'm watching this and I'm like, whoa, you can't hold hands in public. And then he like brushes her cheek and I was like, you can't touch her face in public.
Yeah.
And then like the very end they kissed and I was like, this is so unrealistic that they would kiss in public.
Yes, she and John find each other up in the like observation balcony. They're all cutesy. At the end, they have this conversation with the dad outside. I wrote down here, I'm like, okay, Papa is a fairy godmother. He's granting so many wishes right now. He's being like, he's like, yeah, I totally think you guys should be married. Also, I just made the first step for abolishing slavery. Also, I'm going to make sure that you're not only like, I mean, you're already, I think, good enough for my daughter, but society doesn't. So I'm going to help you get a really high paying job as a lawyer, just like you wanted. I'm granting all the wishes. Peace out, bye. And gets in his carriage and rides off. But then we get this line when they're talking about getting married. And I love it so, so much when John proposes to Dido. And in part of her response, she says to him, I love you for all that you are with all that I am. And it's so dang cute.
Did you write it down for your vows?
No. It's very sweet.
It's so cute. And I think another moment in that I loved is like, he drives away and Papa drives away and John turns to her and he goes, did I hear that right? And she's like, yeah, he's going to hire you and it's going to be great. And she goes, no, you love me?
Oh, no.
Like, I couldn't give a shit about the job.
Cute. Yes. It's very sweet. I would say if you are someone who loves romance and also like a Hollywood version of like justice being done in history, then definitely watch this movie. That's what I say.
Yeah, it's very good. We obviously loved it since we're talking about it forever. We have one last thing to talk about and then we'll stop trapping you on our podcast.
Oh, yes.
Piper, what's the last thing we saved for the very end?
I love that you're setting me up so I can set you up for this.
Thank you. It's tennis. That's what a podcast is.
I love it so much. Okay, so as we talked about, paintings are so important in this movie. And I mean, Dido noticed it as a young child. She talks about it with John. She's worried about being painted next to Elizabeth. And Lillian, would you like to tell our listeners, in case they are not aware, what the significance of composition in paintings has to do with this film?
Yes. So something that I'm guessing Piper had a better understanding of than I did going in, so I did more a reading via the internet, is all of these paintings kind of throughout the movie, we keep seeing pictures of white people with a black person in the painting. And all of the black people are significantly lower than the white person. They're often in the shadow of the white person. They're generally often kneeling and holding something up to the white person. It's disgusting. And that is one of the reasons why this painting was the inspiration for the movie. So this painting was the first piece that was kind of the rest of the movie was built around. It was painted in 1779, and it is of Dido Elizabeth Belle and her cousin, Lady Elizabeth Murray. It hung in Kenwood House, where this story takes place until 1922, and now it hangs in a palace in Scotland. It is the first European portrait of a black subject at equal eye line with a white aristocrat. The depiction implies via their poses that Elizabeth's formality and bookishness is contrasted with the wild and exotic turban and natural figure of Belle. So that's what art historians say about this painting, and it's a very cool.
Yeah. So the whole time Dido was afraid that she'd be painted lower than her essential sister that she feels she is an equal to and is an equal to. And yet when she sees the painting revealed, which they have this whole moment where she sees it through a window, she's like sitting out in a garden reading a book, and then the painter inside is revealing it to her papa. And she sees it and she has this look of awe on her face, and she sees that she and Elizabeth have been painted on the exact same visual plane. And then the look on the dad's face. I feel like these are like the little ways that he reveals his like love for her, because he's not going to go out there and be like talk about all this stuff, but he's gonna commission the painting so that they are equals on that level. It makes me think of how we talked about in the stage version that oftentimes in theater, height and the way that like players are above one another is used to convey power and control over a situation or a lack of control. That's very similar in a lot of kind of classical techniques when painting portraits, of having, how does your eye move through the image, where the person is placed in the scene is very significant to what the artist is trying to convey. So next time you go to an art museum, check it out. See where people are in relation to other people in a painting. And that might reveal something that you weren't otherwise aware of.
But that's Belle, a movie that Piper and I both love.
Yeah.
And you should too. If you're like, Lillian, I miss Jane Eyre, don't worry. That's still our main hustle. We are going to be back next week with a very special episode, our second rewatch. We rewatched the 2011 version of Jane Eyre with Shark-Face Michael Fassbender and everybody's favorite Jane, at least mine, Mia, whose last name is long and very similar to someone I know, and so I pronounce it wrong every time, so I'm not going to.
Oh my gosh, Mia's fine. She can just become a new one-name celebrity.
Yeah, we're going to make Mia a one-name celebrity via this podcast.
Yeah, but before we go, we do have to give our rating for this film. So,
oh my God, I forgot about that.
That's okay. We'll do it fast. I'm going to say a 9 out of 10 Belles, but I want you to use the Disney Princess Belle for my ranking.
Okay. Yeah. Good to know. I'm also doing 9 out of 10. I didn't think about this.
Say beasts.
Oh my God.
No! Yes!
No!
Be my beast, Lillian.
I'm going to give it 9 out of 10. 9 out of 10 not quite a bonnet hats. Whatever those little hats were. We didn't even talk about the fashion. This movie is great fashion. People should watch it for all the things. It's like a bonnet, but it's like a fancy hat that they pin on the top of their elaborate hair. Yeah. And I like it.
Yeah, exactly. So one of those. Fancy hats.
Fancy hats.
There we go.
Incredible. But if people want to give us their opinions as to which specific kisses moments in this they thought were the best, how can people do that, Piper?
Well, you can reach out to us on social at Airbuds on most social platforms. You can also send us an email, airbuds@gmail.com. If you really like the show, consider leaving us a review. Maybe your favorite period drama that isn't just about white people. We'd love to add those to our list.
For sure.
Yeah. 5 stars would be great. We'd love that. Otherwise,
we love 5 stars.
You can also contribute to our Patreon and get lots of cool behind the scenes stuff. Including,
if you wish you could buy us coffee, like if you listen to this and you're like, these people need coffee, you could just join our Patreon. That definitely will pay for coffee at some point for someone.
Yeah, that'd be really nice. And we'll give you fun gifties and behind the scenes things in return. So thank you guys for joining us. This is so long for a palate cleanser, but we will see you next time. Happy Jane Eyre reading and watching.
Bye.
Bye. She left me.